Dear students, welcome to second language English class on S.U.M.I Heroes Network. So today I'll be doing a poem Break, Break, Break by Alfred Lord Tennyson. So before starting the poem, I would like to say a few things about the poet, that is Alfred Lord Tennyson. Was a British poet. He was born in 1809 and he died in 1892. And he belonged to the Victorian era. Now, the history of English literature is divided into several or various eras or ages. For example, the Elizabethan age, the Romantic age, and the modern age. Alfred Lord Tennyson belonged to the Victorian age. Now, Victorian age refers to the period when Queen Victoria was ruled over the United Kingdom of Great Britain. So, when Queen Elizabeth ruled over England, it is known as the Elizabethan period or Elizabethan age. So similarly, the Queen Victoria's reign is known as the Victorian era. Now, some of the notable works of Alfred Lord Tennyson are The Charge of the Light Brigade, Ulysses, In Memoriam A.H.H. Now, one of the characteristics of the Victorian poets is that we find a note of pessimism in their works. So, they focused on the pain and suffering of the common people. So, similarly, the poem Break, Break, Break is also filled with a note of pessimism. So, Break, Break, Break is an elegy. Now, what is an elegy? An elegy is a sad poem of lamentation where the poet expresses his sorrows upon the loss of someone very near to him or her. Now, Break, Break, Break is an elegy which is dedicated to his friend, that is Arthur Henry Hallam, who died suddenly at the age of 22. Now, In Memoriam is also another elegy which is dedicated to the same person, that is Arthur Henry Hallam. So, In Memoriam, the title says In Memoriam A.H.H. Now, in other words, we can say that this poem, Break, 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 is a shorter version of another elegy, that is In Memoriam. So, In Memoriam is quite longer than this poem. So, the poem has 4 quatrains. So, quatrain means a stanza which consists of 4 lines. So, 4 quatrains means 4 into 4, that is equal to 16 lines. So, this elegy consists of 16 lines. So, as you know very well that this poem is an elegy. So, the poet over here is expressing his sorrows on the loss of his dear friend, that is Arthur Henry Hallam. All right. So, the poet over here is mourning the death of his friend and is forced to face the fact that his friend is not going to return. The poet is unsettled. He is unable to cope with the irrecoverable loss of his friend. The fleeting nature of life is deeply troubling the poet. So, let us begin the poem. So, I am going to read the poem and then explain it to you. So break, break, break on thy cold grey stones, O sea, and I would that my tongue could utter the thoughts that arise in me. So when the poem begins, the poet is at the seashore and he is looking at the sea. And when he looks at the sea, a comparison is being made between the situation of the poet and the sea. So the poet compares his situation with the sea over here. So when he compares his situation with the sea, he finds that the sea, the waves of the sea is battering the rocks on the seashore. So what he realizes is that the sea waves keeps moving and keeps making noises. So in a way, the sea is able to express his thoughts. So the sea is able to vent its energy. But the poet cannot express or utter his thoughts. He feels helpless at the loss of his friend. So that is why he says, and I would that my tongue could utter the thoughts that arise in me. All right? So the poet, at the loss of his friend, cannot express his thoughts or his pain or his emotional sufferings to anyone. The sea can express or vent out its energy or its feelings, but the poet cannot. So in the first stanza, we find that the poet is unable to express or utter his thoughts or his pain or his emotional sufferings. Let's move on to the second stanza. Oh well for the fisherman's boy that he shouts with his sister at play. Oh well for the sailor lad that he sings in his boat on the bay. Now when the poet looks at the sea, he finds other people at the seashore. Here we find a contrast between what he sees and his own situation or what he feels. Now, the people at the seashore, they possess joy and fulfillment whether they are alone or together. But the poet feels alone because his friend has left him. That is why the fisherman has his boy, he has his son. The sister and brother are playing together, have each other. All right? And the sailor has his boat, and the sailor's son has is singing in his boat. But the poet feels alone. So here too, we find a contrast between the world, the outside world, and the world inside his mind or the world inside his heart. He feels alone and he feels that the outside world is very much indifferent to his pain and emotional sufferings. The third stanza, and the stately ships go on to their heaven under the hill. But oh, for the touch of a vanished hand and the sound of a voice that is still. In the third stanza also, we find a contrast between what the poet sees and his own situation. So looking at the sea, he sees ships reaching to their heaven. So heaven over here means port or the harbor where the ships rest securely. Right? But oh, for the touch of a vanished hand and the sound of a voice that is still. Now the ships reach their destination where they are safe and secure. They are very much content or satisfied with their destination. But the friend of the poet, the destination of his friend is not a happy one, because the destination of his friend is the grave where he is buried, and it is an unpleasant one. All right. Now, when the ships they reach their destination, they meet with their loved ones. All right, and they converse or talk to each other. Whereas the destination of the poet's friend is his grave. All right. So now the poet can no longer touch touch the hand of his friend or converse with his friend. He can no longer have a conversation or share his emotions, thoughts or feelings with his friend. So that is why he is missing his friend very much, and he feels that he cannot touch the hand or touch his friend, neither can he have or talk to his friend. All right. The destination over here means the end, and the ships, the end of the destination is a happy one. They are very content or satisfied. But the end of his friend is an unpleasant one. All right. The end over here means the end of activity. Activities like talking to his friend or having a handshake with his friend. Now the last stanza. Break, break, break at the foot of thy crags, O sea. But tender grace of a day that is dead will never come back to me. Now in the fourth stanza, the poet, here too we find a contrast between the outside situation and the situation of the poet. Now the contrast over here is that the waves of the sea keeps hitting the rocks of the cliffs. When a wave comes and hits the rocks, another wave again returns and hits the rocks on the seashore. All right? But the days that the poet has spent with his friend is never going to come back, for the dead is never going to return again. So that is the contrast that we find in the fourth stanza also. So, but thy tender grace of a day that is dead will never come back to me, means the days, the times that he has spent with his friend is never going to come back. So again, since this poem is an elegy, so it is filled with pessimism, a note of pessimism. All right? And because of that, we find the contrast in all the above stanza, in all the previous stanzas, we found a contrast between the outside world and the situation of the poet. But over here, we find contrast and similarity at the same time. The similarity is that even though the waves of the sea continuously batter the rocks or at the seashore, all right? But the action of the sea, the constant hitting of the sea is fruitless, or in other words, hopeless. Because even though the waves of the sea hits the rocks, but it cannot break the rocks of the seashore. Neither can it go beyond the seashore, beyond those rocks. So we find a contrast and similarity at the same time in the last stanza. Similarly, the poet's situation is also fruitless and hopeless. No matter how much he thinks of his friend is not going to come back. All right? The days that he spent with his friend is never going to come back. So now the poem makes the readers realize how fleeting our life is. Nothing in this natural world lasts forever. This is what the readers realize after going through this poem. So with this, we end this class. I hope I was able to make you understand the poem clearly. Thank you.